Chris, how are you?
I'm good, my man. I'm good. Excited to be here.
I am too. You come with a reputation, and so I am excited to have this conversation with you because you go places. I'm fascinated by your craft, and in some respects, I wish that I had training in it because I feel like there's something intimidating and magically wonderful about a camera, and the psychologist in you must be skilled to be able to capture people in moments where they're risking it all, or they're in a vulnerable moment, or just so I am excited for lots of reasons to have this conversation with you. So thank you in advance.
Yeah, thank you. I've been a huge fan of the podcast, been a huge fan of your work. And it's so funny because just prior to this, you were explaining how rooted you are in the surf world, which is kind of where I came from. Not so much that I grew up with aspirations of being a professional surfer. I grew up near the ocean, so it was always a part of my pedigree. It was a canvas that I learned very early to kind of paint on, so to say. And it's interesting because I've always gravitated towards you more from a perspective of like the mental psychology and the mental health within the business world and professional athletes in general. But I love how there's always these kind of like the symbiosis that kind of tends to emerge, in these conversations. And it sounds like we have a lot of mutual friends. And yeah, it's awesome, man.
We definitely do. Okay, so where did you grow up? Let's kind of start at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, straightforward, small town, California, Pismo Beach. It's where I live now, actually. And oddly enough, my departure or my entry into photography wasn't because I was aspiring to be an artist or I was aspiring to explore the inner reaches of my capabilities as a human. It was just because I wanted to leave this small town. I grew up like many kids listening to kind of the 6 o'clock news on repeat and the conversations around the dinner table. And I was from a super blue collar family. And I wanted to know what was out there. My world, the kind of the depth of my world was the national parks that I could drive to from my house, and the vacations we would take in the summer. I never left the country, never went anywhere. So when I picked up a camera, it was like I saw this tool and I saw this thing as a way to maybe get me out into the world. And it was definitely a delusion of grandeur in the beginning. And it didn't happen right away, obviously, but that was kind of my excitement. That was what drew me to it. So it was more about using photography as a methodology for seeing what else was out there, for teaching me something, and not so much for the art and the creativity of it in some way. But yeah, Central California is where I am today.
Pismo Beach, good surfing, rugged coastline. There's some good surfing up where you are. So
Yeah.
Did you grow up surfing?
Yeah, I grew up again, like the ocean was almost like a babysitter. My mom would just drop me off and she'd be like, okay, I'm picking you up in a couple hours. And I'd be like, all right, great. And so it was always just like being around the ocean, body surfing,
Yeah.
boogie boarding, surfing, hanging around the pier, kind of like getting into trouble, and then it was a funny extension to kind of turn this into, I guess, a career path by being a surf photographer for a number of years, working for magazines, going on trips, because this thought of just like being in the parking lot at the beach, and then turning that into like my day job was kind of an odd one. But yeah.
Okay, so how old were you when you picked up a camera and said, "Oh, you know what? Like this is a ticket. Like I can go places with this." How old were you?
I was 19 years old. I was just finishing up high school. I had done a little bit of art in high school and I liked the creative process. And I kind of told myself, I'm like, what'd be great is to be hired because of your creativity. I had a full ride scholarship to go and work on cars as an auto tech. That was actually like my kind of career up until that moment. I would, that's what I would do. Just work on vehicles. And I loved getting my hands dirty. I loved the mechanics of it. I loved the understanding of how something worked. But I started spending more and more time on the weekends, just going up the coast of California, Big Sur, these wild places, jumping over fences and trying to get into the ocean. And all of a sudden, I think what it was I grew up again in a single parent home for a long time and not having like a father figure, it was like I kind of found this sort of my group, my gang, right? And my place within that group of boys was like to be the documentarian. So it kind of it fostered a lot of good memories, like, oh yeah, going up there and having these experiences and taking pictures of that. And it was an extension of the art that I was doing. But at 19, high school's over, life begins. I'm going to a junior college in town here. And I'm like, you know what? This sucks. Like, this is not what I want to be doing. This is not where I feel passionate. And I maybe the most mature thought I've ever had in my life for some reason came to me, that I was like, I am unprepared for this opportunity. But if I don't take this opportunity now, it will always be just out of reach. It's like that idea of like you're at a train station and your bags aren't packed, but the train is leaving and you have to go. It doesn't matter if you're ready or not. Opportunities don't really wait for you. So I saw this as like, I'm going to get too comfortable. I'm going to get too comfortable in my life and my career to eventually be willing to suffer this much, because I knew that doing this career path was going to require me to suffer. So I quit my job and I quit school and I put everything into being a photographer. And it didn't really matter if I was taking pictures of surfers or athletes or whatever. It was like, I just wanted to make a living with a camera. And obviously the goal, the end goal was to like have it take me somewhere. Didn't really care where, I just knew it was somewhere.
Okay. So you got a lot in here, which is, let me play back some of the things I'm hearing, right? And so laissez-faire parenting. So parents were, you didn't say this, but caring enough to take you somewhere, and then kind of, in your words, dropped you off. And then you had a babysitter, which was the wild. And
Yeah.
I relate in many forms of that. When I think back into definitely my high school years, like the danger that I was in the wild, I had no business being in. And can you relate to that as well? Like way over your
Yeah.
head. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, especially as a parent now, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy.
What were they? Yeah. Okay. So laissez-faire, did they have their own stuff going on where, because I'm trying to put laissez-faire parenting, the wild, and I want to get out of here mixed with, oh, wait, there's a path to comfort. I don't want the path of comfort. I need to go the path of suffering. So I'm trying to triangulate a couple of these for you. And so can you bridge a couple of those leaps that I just made?
Yeah. So I grew up, my mom is still my hero. I watched her work multiple jobs. I was a single child until my stepdad came into my life and brought my brothers into my life. But for the formative years,
so it was you and mom, and your
yeah,
biological father was not in the picture?
yeah, not in the picture.
And you
right?
had
So,
no biological brothers, sisters?
none. I have a two stepbrothers and a half brother now, but during those formative years, that 0 to 13, 14, it was just me and my mom. And so I think I witnessed her work so hard. And obviously, if I was to go to work with her, it would be like, I'd be in childcare or I'd be doing this. And so it was like at the moment that I started to gain my freedom, she was like, oh, awesome. Like, I'd rather have you be somewhere you want to be out riding bikes with friends, be playing in the street, be at the beach, whatever it is. And it wasn't for, we are so close. Like she did everything to kind of keep me protected. But she wanted to foster that experience of me being in places that inspired me. And I appreciated that. When my dad came along, it was hard because all of a sudden we have a big family. And so we had to do a lot to make it work and make ends meet. And he, worked with his hands, still does, really blue collar family. And so I understood very clearly the constraints financially that were put upon us and what my career path was where it was going to take me. I could just see more of the same. And so I think I had a real lust, a desire to see something different, to find something new. I was the only person in my family at the time who was going to take the path of going to college. So it's funny, as you mentioned,
Chris, you and me both.
Yeah.
I'm nodding my head like, oh my God. So different kind of makeup of the family structure,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
But first in the family to have the opportunity to go to college.
Yeah.
And so my heart's beating a little bit going, yeah, I know that feeling. And then, and and I went to JUCO too. And I was like,
Yeah.
listen, it was a totally different experience for me. There was
Yeah.
3 professors there that ended up being, I didn't know this, but really good friends. Dr. Cusio, Dr. Perkins, and Dr. Zanka. Apologize
Nice.
for me saying them out because it's just, they were so important. They saw me coming and I just fell in love with learning. And so you didn't have that. You had this calling to get into the wild, right? And to go see places. And so I want to know, how did you make that decision because you could have stayed the safe path, but you wanted suffering. So bridge that gap for me. How did you know that suffering was going to be the way for you?
Well, it's funny because you don't immediately recognize that it's suffering in the beginning.
This is looking back. This is hindsight, insight. Okay.
It's definitely retrospective, but to be honest, what's more interesting to me is that I've chosen that path multiple times, and I've chosen it over and over in my life, and I still choose it today. In fact, I look back at those 5 years when I started my career, eating on 50 cents a day, living below poverty level, sleeping in my truck. I am in no capacity the most creative, talented person to ever hold a camera. I'm just the person who might be the most stubborn, the most willing to submit themselves to the craft and to put in the hours, the 10,000 hours. Like, I knew there was going to be a 10,000 hour rule. And I was like, yeah, let me get those 10,000 hours in the first month. Right. Like,
okay. So you've got a tenacity about you. You have a vision, correct? Like, I want to go somewhere. I don't want to do this thing here. I want to go somewhere. And it has to do with nature and the wild. It has to do with a camera. I like surfing. Okay. So now I'm starting to get this, but so you had this vision, and was it crystal clear, or was it just more like, I just want to be in those places. I want to be in those places.
I wanted to be in those places. And you're spot on. It wasn't crystal clear. It was, at first it was like, I love landscape photography. This is what I grew up on, Ansel Adams, Michael Vitale, and these masters. And so I did a small kind of a tenure under a landscape photographer, learned a bit from him, and realized very quickly this wasn't for me. I didn't have the time, the money, or the patience to shoot what it took to create images. And I didn't have a platform to sell them. I didn't have a gallery. So I came back from that kind of internship just really broken. And then I
how old?
I was about 20. It's about 20 years old. 20,
so this is your first go. 19, I found a camera. I'm going somewhere. Delusions of grandeur, right? And then, I love nature. I found a person. I'm going to be at this person's, knee. And then you came back. Yeah. And then you're like, damn.
Well, it was eye-opening. It was my first taste of like the real world, and somebody who I am grateful for giving it to me straight. And then I came back and I recollected myself, and I was like, well, I want to be in these landscapes. I want to be in nature. Surfing is something I grew up. I know the ocean is something I'm not afraid of. This could be a path. I could try to shoot surfing for a living. And I set some goals. I made some connections. I interned at a magazine because there was a photo editor who kind of like saw my passion, my lust for this, and my willingness to suffer. And so I basically drive down 5 hours on Monday morning, go to Oceanside, sleep in the parking lot, Oceanside Pier parking lot for 5 days, work at the magazine, take showers in the bathroom. And then I would, basically, exactly. And I would
shower in the marina. Yeah. Like I know that surf break as well. And so back then, this is like probably, I don't know, 15 years ago for you, something like that. Like, it's different than it is now. And so it was a little more sleepier. Yeah.
Yeah. A little more homeless vibe, for sure. But it's so funny. I look back on all of that, and I definitely recognize that like those were the moments that I feel so grateful for. So much gratitude, so much fondness. And in many ways I miss it. I miss it when I have a lot now. I have a lot to manage. I have a lot of responsibilities. I have a family, I've got an office, I've got a studio, I've got employees. The simplicity of those experiences.
Oh God, I love this part of our conversation right now.
Yeah. Well, it's the constant, I'm never great, and I've never been great about appreciating the moment. I'm always either looking ahead, not so much looking behind, but in the last couple of years, looking back at that moment, being like, wow, like to move towards something with such little fear is so profound. I can't do that now. I have to take people's considerations, payroll, mortgages into consideration.
Okay, I want to take a quick little break here to talk about Brava. Brava is the world's most advanced, powerful, smart oven that harnesses the power of light to cook faster than any other technology. If you are strapped for time, most of us are, and you're in need of quick, healthy meals, Brava's got you covered here. They make it so easy. Select your recipe, load your tray, and press this little green button. It's awesome. They have over 7,000 fully automated recipe programs created by professional chefs. You can even watch your food on Brava's app from the comfort of your couch while it's cooking. It's amazing. So what they do is Brava uses light energy instead of hot air to cook food. And they cook it 2 to 4 times faster than the conventional methods that you're familiar with. And they have 3 distinct cooking zones where Brava cooks up to 3 ingredients at the same time with different levels of doneness. And so in one zone, you can have your meat, another zone, you can have a couple vegetables, and another zone, something else. It's really easy to make a healthy meal in about 15 minutes. For me, it was this crispy salmon, and then there was some cherries on it, and I had some asparagus lined up. It's awesome. You can put anything you want in there. Literally, it's like having a fully automated sous chef right at your side. So stop spending so much time on takeout and delivery apps, and cook your food. It's really pretty cool what they've done here. I want to encourage you to go check it out, brava.com. And then make sure that you use the code Finding Mastery at checkout for $200 off. That's Brava, BRAVA.com. And then use the code Finding Mastery for $200 off. And Finding Mastery is brought to you by Wealthfront. A lot of investment apps make it easy to start trading, but just because it's easy to do doesn't mean that you know what you're doing. Wealthfront makes it easy to invest and easy to grow your savings with a diversified portfolio that balances your other riskier bets, especially in times like these when the market is quite volatile. So you can start investing in no time with Wealthfront's classic portfolio, or make it your own with things that you care about. Socially responsible funds, maybe technology, crypto trusts, or hundreds of other investments. Wealthfront was designed by financial experts to help you turn your good ideas into great investments without the hassle of doing everything yourself. So if you don't want to spend hundreds of hours trying to lower your tax bill, they can help you with that too. Not sure how to rebalance your portfolio or even what rebalancing is? They do that for you automatically. Wealthfront is trusted with over $28 billion in assets, helping nearly 500,000 people build their wealth. To start building your wealth and to get your first $5,000 managed for free for life, go to wealthfront.com/finding mastery. So how do you spell it? Wealth, WEALTH, front, FRONT, wealthfront.com/finding mastery to start building your wealth. So go to wealthfront.com/finding mastery to get started today. And now let's get right back into the convo. Dude, I want to, what do I want to do? I want to grab you by the shoulder. I want to put my arm around your neck a little bit. I want to do a couple like, wait a minute. Like what you're saying to me sounds absolutely crazy now.
Yeah.
Which is, I look back with romance, the innocence of truly going for it. And at the time, I don't think I appreciated it. And now when I look back, there's a romance about how I did things because I had very little to lose, if anything.
Yeah. And it's hard. I think also because I'm doing more of the hard work now. And I think that as a psychologist, you'll appreciate this, that, there's this analogy of the 4 burners that I heard years ago. I don't know if you ever heard this, you probably have, but, where your life is like a stovetop, and this is like really simplifying things, but you have these 4 burners. One represents family, and one represents relationships, and one is health, your own health, and one is business. And in order to be successful, you have to turn one of them off. And in order to be really successful, you have to turn 2 of them off. And I think that I chose the really successful route. And in order to do that, I made some real sacrifices. And it's only been in the last 4 to 5 years I've had to kind of come to the full reality of what those decisions meant. And I guess there was an innocence to that experience of just being so driven by something at the ultimate demise of a lot of things, my own health and my real certain friendships and relationships. Yet there was a purity to it. There's something pure about that. And I miss it, but I also look at it from like a more cautious perspective, like it's there, but that was dangerous. And I'm grateful that I ended up where I ended up, because it also could have taken me somewhere else. And it's been a really wild journey. Nowadays, like obviously life is more complicated, yet there's more to appreciate. There's more joy. But you have to look for it a bit more acutely. You have to be more focused on those things.
And so the part that I was like, my antenna popped really quickly on just a moment ago when you were talking about, I'm now working from a different place, like fear of letting others down, fear of not making payroll, fear of, and all the responsibilities of adulting. And so what happened?
I grew up.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I like before you answer it, pin that with, let me just give some context to why I'm having this experience. Yeah. Before this conversation, I called one of our mutual friends, Rebecca Rush. And for those maybe who are not familiar with Rebecca, I mean, how do you describe Rebecca? I mean, she is like, she's a heavy. Right?
I mean,
she's a heavy.
And she's a guide for many people, she's
on,
kind of
on more than one
many
level.
levels. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Many levels. Yeah.
And call it endurance athlete. She was on the podcast, but call it an endurance athlete, but she's also a guide. And she was a guide for you in some respects on a mission that you set up to go to Iceland and to go bike it in the winter months, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't mean just go for a little bike ride. You guys went to the volcano. Did you circumnavigate or whatever the phrase is, the whole country?
We intersected from north to south through like the interior. And obviously she has been an inspiration to me. And I think that I'm luckily at that place in my life where I really seek out the people that I want to work with, people that I want to collaborate with, are people that I actually selfishly want to learn from. I want to glean something from them. I want to gain some knowledge from them, because it's so important to me. Like that's the one thing that I hopefully never stop doing, is learning. And so she just had so much to offer. And I felt like a sponge. I felt like I was back at an internship learning from that person. And although I brought something to the table, I felt so privileged to be able to work with her. And not only in a professional setting, but as a friend, like as a mutual peer in some ways, because I really, for a big part of my life, being an action sports photographer, you're just constantly trying to keep up with athletes. It's like you constantly live in the 80% realm where you can only get 80% good at something, because I'm being asked to go shoot professional surfing and then go ski touring and then ride a bike with some, it's like I can never fully dedicate myself to a certain craft, because I need to keep my all these knives fairly sharp. So I really gave myself to that sport so that I could, win that respect in some way, but also like make sure that I was a good and prepared student and a contributor to this expedition. And so I was grateful, just on a professional and an athletic setting. I was grateful to her.
Because that's where I was having the tension. I didn't know when that moment happened for you, but I'm thinking about Oceanside, and I'm thinking about the Iceland trip, where in Iceland, when I was talking to her about it, she said that you were a student, just like you talked about, where you weren't the professional. I'm sure you brought a camera, but you weren't the one in control of some stuff. And so you were suffering at a different level, not that different maybe in my mind, the way you're suffering in Oceanside. Okay. So those are kind of some interesting bookends. And then I think it allows us to maybe there's a juxtaposition here to talk about business, but underneath of it for a moment, let's go back to suffering and why suffering? Why are you working to move away from comfort?
Yeah.
What's happening there for you?
I'll say that I was lucky enough to give an entire TED talk dedicated to that topic, but the kernel of truth really is that anything that's worth pursuing is going to require us to suffer a little bit. And I think that for me, there was a cognitive choice in the midst of my career, the highlight years of my career, where I was working for the magazine. I had the dream job, literally, like I had the dream job. People that would talk to me, I'd be like, yeah, I'm a surf photographer. They're like, no way. So you're like, you go to tropical locations with like beautiful women everywhere, and you're like sipping a Mai Tai on the beach. And I'm like, well, not exactly, but kind of. It was the dream job, and it was honestly what I truly dreamt of doing. I wanted to see wild places and go to these locations. But at a certain point, it dawned on me that what I was actually doing was I was selling this sense of adventure that wasn't really there. It was contrived. It was inauthentic. It was strong Wi-Fi and great dining and just a big hotel on a beach somewhere. And my lens was pointed at the ocean, but it was in a way that wasn't expressing my true experience, which was that I grew up in this wild place, finding myself out in these landscapes. And that's kind of what I wanted to use the camera to do. I mean, this is an evolution from just wanting to travel, right? This is V2, right, of Chris Burkard, right? So the goal at first was just to collect stamps in my passport and get a paycheck. And that eventually evolved to realizing that there's a lot of people at home who don't get to experience these places. And I wanted to bring them back something meaningful. And in order for me to bring back something meaningful, the images had to be meaningful to me, and they just weren't. And so I was going to the tropics, and I was going to places that truly didn't mean that much. And so I eventually set my sights on places that were colder, harder to get to, required more patience and effort and energy and a lot of things that ultimately the photographs really meant something when you're on a beach in Iceland and it's, -20 and you're documenting somebody, a human being, interacting with nature in such an amazing way. To me, the photograph started to mean something. And so I kind of coined this term that I ended up using in the TED Talk, which was like, I wanted to go on a crusade against the mundane, because my job, for as dreamy as it is in any career path, as dreamy as it may seem, doesn't matter what they tell you, it can become at risk of becoming mundane. And I think that what I've realized is that the requirement, the barrier of entry for that is you need to have personal growth within that career path. And that's what I think I've constantly tried to do over these years is develop personal growth within my career path. It's not always about suffering. I mean, that would be such a masochistic way to look at it. It's honestly about wanting to foster more meaningful experiences. And if I'm being transparent, like there's an element of suffering. And I think suffering, the fact that you're giving more of yourself for something, you're giving something of yourself that's more meaningful than just clicking the shutter. And in doing so, the experience, it leaves something more with you. We actually remember those experiences more. They're more visceral, audible, smell, sight, sound, everything becomes more ingrained in the psyche. So that's important to me.
How do you answer this seemingly simple question? What does physical
There are no
suffering...
simple questions.
No.
There are no simple questions.
Yeah. Yeah. So what does physical suffering offer you? And the context of why I want to ask this is because suffering is a loaded word, and many people are confused by it, because suffering can be an enduring suffering of psychological suffering. And then there's momentary suffering, like discrete moments of suffering. And there's purpose and accidental almost. And then there's trauma. And then there's physical suffering. Again, there's acute and there's chronic. So what does the moderately time-bound suffering offer you? Because you're choosing it. There's a privilege here that I'm going to go choose suffering. And so that's all the context behind this seemingly simple question. Like, what does physical suffering do for you?
Yeah, it's actually very simple. It's a requirement for me to feel more connected to the work that I'm creating. Right. And as I said before, I actually studied, there was the work of an Australian psychologist that I studied when I was preparing for this TED Talk, because I was trying to understand for myself, why does suffering force us into the instant? And as I mentioned prior, about 20 minutes ago or whatever, I said, I've always had a hard time appreciating the here and now. I'm always looking ahead. I'm always kind of looking behind. I'm always thinking about that next thing that, especially nowadays, I've got the kids and the family and the wife and the taxes, blah, blah. So when I choose to do something, I need it to thrust me into the moment. I need to feel my feet planted. I mean, again, this is probably because I'm a lower evolved human being. I'm sure that, there are many of us who can maybe just do that immediately. But when I'm creating artwork, when I'm creating something beautiful or a story or a narrative, I want to feel like I'm in that moment. And that's oftentimes what suffering does for us. And I really, truly don't enjoy that word. I think that it's important to acknowledge that the suffering I'm talking about is a privileged suffering. You're allowing yourself to feel it. You put yourself there. Nobody forced you to climb Mount Everest. To tell stories that are just purely about the human struggle, it misses the point. There's so much more that drives us to do these things. There's so much more that calls upon us when we're in those moments. And I think for me, yes, it's a privilege. I acknowledge that. I'm choosing to be there because I also think, and I know that to not bring to the table all of my knowledge, my understanding, my skill sets, my awareness is almost to relegate my experience to something more simple, to something more mundane. And I don't want the mundane.
This is the thing about suffering, is that for a long time we use our external to call on our internal. And it's good. You see it in sport, traditional stick and ball sport all the time. Is like at the end of a grueling workout is when you start to learn something about yourself. Okay. And then, so you're saying, listen, when I plant myself in the Arctic or Alaska, you had a cover shot in Surfing Magazine, or one of my friends was on that trip with you. We can talk about it in a minute, Alex Gray, where it was a beautiful cover shot, like frontier type cover shot of surfing. It was, that was awesome. And so, there's something about going to those places where you learn about yourself. Great. Okay. I just want to add to the conversation here that you can do that sitting on a cushion too.
True.
Right.
Very true.
you can do that. Like some of the great writers, they do that because it's a forcing function to write something that is truthful. So writing is one, conversations with people of wisdom, if you're lucky enough to know someone, and then mindfulness. And so out of those three, I know you're taking pictures is your main craft, and then you go into environments that call on you, right? That require you to dig and use your internal resources to do something in your language that matters. Do you have a mindfulness practice, a writing practice, or do you have a tribe that you call on of wisdom?
I think for me, conversation is really, because from what I understand, kind of what we're getting to is like those experiences in the field, they don't really serve us unless we take the time to actually think through them, to process them, to digest them. It reminds me of a talk from the great, travel writer Pico Iyer, who kind of touches on this. Like all of his greatest experiences were sort of really manifest in his bedroom while he was thinking through them, meditating on them. And I fully feel like for me, I place so much emphasis on human interaction, storytelling, whether that's in a platform like this, or if it's in a platform like going and doing a film premiere, or going and doing a slideshow, or speaking at a corporate event, whatever that might be. To me, that's like one of, I think, the great ways in which those experiences are able to come full circle, because to not sit and fully process them and leave them all in the field or leave them all in the images, it doesn't do them a full service. So I guess to say that truly life's greatest mysteries have evolved for me by just making sure that I think through them. I mean, I find those moments come to me in the oddest of places. It's not like I have to be sitting on my cushion in my bedroom staring at a picture of Buddha to do that. It's like, it can be on a plane. It can be in a conversation with somebody where there's an emotional connection. It can be whilst listening to a podcast where you're actually hearing somebody say what you want to articulate, but you haven't found the words to. Sometimes it can be in a jail cell in Russia. I've also found a lot of mindfulness in those situations as well. And I
Yeah,
think that
my jail cell experiences in Russia, those were pretty intense too.
you should really spend time there. It's a great place to align all your chakras.
Come on, yeah, yeah, tell me that story. Like, I have no idea about this part of your life.
I was young, I was 21, 21, 22 maybe. And ultimately it's the byproduct of, as you can tell, somebody who's really passionate about what they do. And I felt like I had cracked the code. I figured out what I wanted to do with my career, with my life. As I said, I was in the heyday of my, so I was maybe about 24, 25. I was in the heyday of kind of like shooting surfing and going to all these places. And my editors were sending me to Bali and India and awesome locations, but places that weren't fulfilling me personally. And so I set my sights, as I said, on colder locations, and they required a lot of research, a lot of effort, a lot of planning. And I say that retrospectively because in the beginning I was like, yeah, I'm just going to go there. I found a contact online. I'm going to go to this place. This is going to be awesome. We're going to find waves. It's going to be a great story. And I went to Vladivostok, Russia. I got there and I personally dealt with all the entry visas for all the people on our team, the athletes, the writer, yada, yada, yada. We get there and the customs. It's a long story that would take this entire podcast, but I'll just summarize this for you, that there was a very nonverbal communication at the border at customs where I looked at her and she looked at me. And I knew right away that no amount of like boyish smile was going to get me through this gate, regardless of the fact that every other person with us just went through effortlessly. And she pointed at my visa and I was like, yep, that's my visa. We're good. And she's like, it was the wrong entry date. It was 2 days late or 2 days early. And so I knew in that moment that it was not good. And so after about a 6-hour interrogation, and they poured through every Pelican case of camera gear, looking at everything I had, wondering why this American journalist is entering the country with guys on surfboards. They've never even seen anybody riding these. It's a little suspicious in general. I was basically thrown into jail for 24 hours until I was deported to Korea. But as I think back to that moment, I mean, I've never truly been more afraid in my life. Like, it's all I can do is laugh now. But in the moment, I was terrified. I never had my rights stripped from me like that. I had never felt so like my life was meaningless. Like, I was in this holding cell. There was a guard at my door. I kid you not. This is going to sound just terrible, like I'm reciting the script from a James Bond movie. But I had a guard at my door. He had one eye. His name was Igor, and he sat there all day. And I had all my stuff with me. I was on the phone with my wife at the time. I got married at 21. So my wife is losing her mind. She's freaking out. And I'm like, I'm in jail. They're going to deport me. I don't know what's going on. Yeah. I didn't have a lot of information. I had a Russian fixer who tried to help me get out of it, but it seemed to only make things worse. And, my hope was that they weren't going to like impound and keep all my camera gear. I mean, this was my life at this time. And I was, barely hanging on with not even enough money to pay for the metal lining on my tires, my truck to go away. So it was scary. It was kind of like career ending kind of situation. I remember I had my phone. I called my editors. I'm like, I'm so sorry this is going on, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'll try to get back into the country to finish this thing. I'm calling my wife. She's calling the U.S. Embassy, and the U.S. Embassy's like, hey, we can get you out of there if they don't feed you and they don't treat you correctly. That's the only way they can get you out of there. And so I'm like, okay, well, so I'm supposed to just starve myself and then maybe I can get out of here. And then all of a sudden I get a knock on the door and it's Igor. And he's like, come here. And I go with him down to this lower basement of jail, like kind of like sub jail, where like wherever they keep all the really bad American journalists. I don't know. And by the way, I love Russia. The people are amazing. This honestly was a miscommunication. It was, as I'll get to at the end, this is my fault. But I'm leading down to this place, metal everything. It looks like it was some kitchen, industrial kitchen meant to feed like a military. And I go to this big table. It looked like a film set from a Wes Anderson movie. There's just 2 cups. And one cup is like some soup, looked like lentils, smelled like soup in Russia. The other one was just cucumbers and mayonnaise. And I'm like, and Igor's like, food. And I'm like, I'm going to eat every bite, bro. I'm going to eat every single bite. no complaints, because he got wind that I was like calling the U.S. Embassy. And so I ate that food. And I'll give you one piece of advice. Just don't eat food in a Russian jail cell. I spent the rest of my time hovering over the small hole in the ground, just having diarrhea. And I had been watching a lot of like Jack Bauer 24, and I kept thinking of like ways to break out of here that would be elaborate. But I eventually basically, and there's one more piece of the story I have to tell you, because I think you'll just appreciate it. And it's so funny, but, and, growing up in a small town, you go on these trips as a kid, and you're kind of like reaching out to friends, like, oh, anybody who's been to Russia, anybody who knows anything, like yada, yada, yada. And one of my mom's friends was like, oh, I actually, I did a foreign exchange program there. Here's a couple of words you need to know. You need to know this, you need to know this, how to say thank you, how to say, oh yeah, and how to say, where's the bathroom? That would be great. And so when I get dropped off to Igor, and I'm using the bathroom, it's not flushing after I have like full on diarrhea all night. Sorry, sure, this is exactly what you want to talk about. And then he comes
This is great, dude.
Yeah. He comes back to the door. It's like 5 hours later. I'm just like famished, exhausted, whatever, been in this jail cell. And I'm like, I ask him this phrase, like, I'm trying to say like the bathroom isn't working. It's like, I whatever I had been told, could you please move, something like that, blah, blah, blah. And he looked at me in a way that you don't have to speak Russian to know that the way he looked at me meant that what I was saying was not what I meant. And I asked him again, and then he like looked at me again, like really cocked his head. And I was like, I'm going to stop saying this, and I'm just going to like curl back into a ball and like leave. And he luckily left after like some awkward pauses. And I'll just tell you this, it was only months later that I asked that same friend what that meant. And she's like, oh my God. Yeah, apparently I never envisioned you would be thrown in a Russian jail cell and ask for an enema, but that's basically what I asked for. I mean, like real deal. Like I was telling this guy, I'm like, I need an enema. Like, and I'm sure all he's thinking is like, what do you have up there? And, so it was hilarious because my wife had actually like told her what was going on. And apparently she was like that lady was just scrambling, like, oh my God, tell him not to say the word. So I got home. I eventually was able to go to Korea. I came back into Vladivostok like 2 days later, went through the whole border fiasco, still got interrogated, was able to go into the country. It ended up being a good trip. But I felt so much anger. I felt so much anger while I was in that jail cell. All I could think about was like, why me? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, I did everything right. I blah, blah. And I wanted just to like point the blame at everybody, point the blame at the Russian, visa place and yada, 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 the passport agency, all these things, pointing the finger. And I think that in the end, I just realized that like there was nobody else to blame but myself. And if I truly wanted the magic of travel to change me, we talk romantically about this, like, oh, travel changes you, it makes you a better person, blah, blah. Like, I was not a better person from that experience. I was a more angry person. And all I recognized was that if I wanted that to change me, that happens before you leave your front door. It happens while you're in the midst of even dreaming up these trips. You have to have enough respect for the places you want to go to. You have to have enough reverence for these places to do their due diligence, to do your research, to check your damn visa entry date and make sure that you're going to go there during the right time. And I had plenty of time to fix that clerical error, but I was too rushed. I was too focused on the end goal, and I missed that, and I paid for it dearly.
Okay, I want to take a quick little break here to talk about Haya. So typical children's vitamins are basically candy in disguise. They're filled with teaspoons of sugar, chemicals that you do not want your kids ingesting. This is why Haya was created. The pediatrician approved superpowered chewable vitamin. Haya is made from a blend of 12 farm fresh fruits and vegetables, and then supercharged with 15 essential vitamins and minerals known to help support a healthy immune system, energy levels, brain function, mood, teeth, bones, and more, of course. It's non-GMO, vegan, dairy-free, allergy-free, gelatin-free, nut-free, and everything else that you can imagine. They've really been thoughtful about it. Haya is designed for kids of all ages and then sent right to your door. My 13-year-old son He loves it. It's his go-to. And what I love about it is that I know that what he's consuming has been thoughtfully designed by people that think like me, like they want their best for their kids. And the way that they're designing this, your first month comes with a reusable glass bottle. So they're thinking about the environment too. And then they've even made it fun where your kids can personalize it with stickers. So my son's got his initials on his. And then every month thereafter, Haya sends a no plastic refill pouch with fresh vitamins. To grab this deal, go to hayahealth.com/finding mastery or enter the code finding mastery at checkout. So it's Haya Health, spelled Hiya, Haya Health, hayahealth.com/finding mastery to get your kids full body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults. Full discount is applied at checkout. And Finding Mastery is also brought to you by Apollo Neuro. If you're feeling pressure, stress in any walk of life that you have, I think that you're going to want to check out how Apollo Neuro might be able to help you. So Apollo's technology trains your nervous system to cope with stress better over time so that you can focus and sleep and stay healthy and productive. How do they do it? It works by engaging with your sense of touch, delivering gentle vibrations to rebalance your nervous system, essentially sending signals to your brain like, hey, if you can attend to this nice little vibration here, you're okay, we're okay. So it's just a signal of like, we're safe. And then in return, it helps to rebalance your stress levels. I wear it twice a day. I wear it after I do anything that's intense, whether it's a workout or something I'm doing, for the job or whatever it might be. And then I also wear it right before bed. So if you're interested in learning more, which I encourage you to do, definitely listen to the previous Finding Mastery episode with their founder, Dr. David Rabin. And when you visit apolloneuro.com/finding mastery, you'll get 15% off your purchase. So it's spelled Apollo, APOLLO, neuro, NEURO. apolloneuro.com/finding mastery for 15% off your purchase. And with that, let's get right back into this conversation. There's a theme for you about missing some details to get to the next phase. There's a theme there for you. Okay, first of all, what a great story. There's my father-in-law. He came to this country with at the age of 16 with $20 in his pocket, and his mom had left him at an earlier age to try to come to America for a better life, and so he shares a really important perspective, and I'll pass that wisdom here, which is in an oversimplified way, either you're a tourist or a traveler. And so the romantic kind of naive view of travel is tourism. Is you're going to go and you're going to eat food that has been sanitized, and you're going to stay in places that are sanitized. And there is a form of traveling that has the 6-star experience and the 5-star experience. I'm not sure that changes you. And so traveling, it sounds like you are a traveler, bar none. And so this experience is a nice emblem for the extreme of traveling. And so I love the part where you said, this travel experience wasn't making me better. So can you unlock just that bit? What is the insight there? Is that you met a hardship, that hardship, your first response was anger. Okay, great. Call that frame 1. And then you said, I'm responsible for my experience. So what's the second frame? What's the unlock to get to the second frame?
Yeah, the unlock was honestly, I didn't have an escape route. And I mean that by I didn't have this to just sift through endlessly and fill my mind with stuff. I didn't have somebody else to call. I had a phone, but obviously I didn't have it's on the iPhone like today. I wasn't on some data plan. I think that nowadays, for me, I don't know if I would have came to that same conclusion now. And I think the reason being is because it's easier to just distract yourself, right? In that moment, I had no exit. I had no escape plan. I had to just sit there and ponder and think on this experience and really think down to the root of it. And so I saw my anger. I met all that. I went past that. And beyond that, I realized that yeah, there was someone to blame, or there was something to blame. And after I pointed fingers in all the directions, I think that the only one left standing was the one pointing at me.
When you go past anger, what's there?
When I go past anger, there's usually a little bit of resentment. Then there's usually some form of clarity, I feel like, because anger
There's not
usually,
there's not sadness, there's not fear, there's not jealousy, shame.
there's relief. I feel like there, because anger for me usually
Okay.
builds in a form of pressure. It tends to happen quickly, and it tends to happen rather fast, right? So it's usually like there's pressure, and once that pressure releases, once I tend to be kind of one of those people, like once I say what I need to say, or I whatever, it's almost like there's relief, and then there, yeah, inevitably there's usually maybe a little bit of regret. Maybe I could have more maturely handled the situation. I could have, and the regret is on myself. Like I could have more maturely handled the situation. I could have been more effective. I could have been more reverent, more respectful of this location, things like that, or in a relationship, right? Or something along those lines. But it's hard in the beginning. Like, for example, had I been in that jail cell, and if I had the ear of somebody, I probably would have given them all my thoughts, and gone through the exercise of just saying all the things. But there wasn't anybody. There was nobody. And that's why it was such a transformative experience, because nowadays in life, there's so many people to hear our complaints. Social media, for example, people just like want to go on there and just tell everybody everything. When you have the moment to sit with it, it's kind of like in that jail cell. I wrote the letter, I put it in the drawer, I let it sit for a day, and then I pulled it back out and I read it, and I was like, well, a lot of this stuff there's a lot of falsehoods in here. I think that I have a better interpretation of why I did this, why I reacted this way, and I can genuinely say it's because of an excitement. But I tend to, again, like you said, I'll sometimes want to hop a little further. I don't want to take that extra step. I want to get to that goal a little faster. And oftentimes I do get to that goal faster, but I suffer along the way, much like quitting college and just living out of my car for 5 years. There were probably easier, more joyous ways to start a career path, not so traumatic, but I chose that path.
What are you trying to sort out now? When you were 19, you wanted to go somewhere, leave comfort, see the world through the camera, and have experiences in the wild. What are you trying to sort out now?
I mean, I think like anybody who has two kids, you're trying to sort out your relationship with your own parents, your own family, and how it's translates to how you're raising your own family, right? So I think the biggest thing that I try to understand now is that what I was dealing with from a self-worth perspective at 19, at 20, is not something that I want to translate to my kids. The thing that I feel so incredibly driven by is the idea that I don't want to pass on some inherent fear of the unknown to my children. I want them to make decisions, to be in these situations that scare them, that terrify them, and not kind of be forced to not live through them because I had a bad experience with them, or some irrational fear that I have. Because I would say that a lot of what drove me was this desire to be accepted, to feel self-worth, growing up again as a young kid in a family where everybody worked. Also, I think that as a self-professed workaholic, it's important to, at a certain point, acknowledge that, like, yeah, it's great to be busy. It's great to work, but at a certain point, you're saying yes to everything because it's all you know. And when work becomes sort of this badge of honor, or all you really know how to do, and you don't know how to say no, it's really dangerous. And I think that as a parent, like that's what I'm working through now. I'm working through accepting the fact that, like, it's easy for me to say yes to work because that's what I'm good at. That's what I've done. That's where I feel the most appreciated. That's where all the pats on the back come, the validation. Where the validation doesn't come is when you're working in a more selfless capacity, raising your kids, or trying to work on a business. And when I tend to do really well out in nature, I tend to not hold a lot of fear there. Where I hold more fear is trying to deal with interpersonal relationships, because that was the burner that I turned all the way off. So, so it's funny, it's like that's kind of what the last 5 years has been more focused on.
You're speaking to me, and I think that you're probably speaking to many in our community. And there's an idea that we've paid a lot of attention to, which is just like this big sign in front of the extraordinaries. And the sign is, early on, I thought I needed to do more to be more.
Yeah.
I need to do the
Yeah.
extraordinary to be and feel extraordinary. And that sign is now like lost a couple bolts and is flipped upside down. And it's like, and so people are reading it upside down now, the extraordinaries, and saying, no, that's right. I need to be more and let the doing flow from there. I need to be more present, be more creative, be more connected, be more authentic, be more skilled, and then let the doing flow from that place. And so does that seem like it is true for you? And please, like, as an applied scientist, I'm not trying to back you into anything. Like, does that seem true?
No, it does. I mean, it does. It does for me now. It's a skill set that I wish I could have applied in the beginning. But in the beginning, I was just more like, the fruits of my labor are all I'm going to be judged on. Nobody cares about anything else. So I was so forced into the mentality that I have to put forth good fruit, good work, good content. And now I feel more empowered I feel equally as empowered. I'm not going to say more, because that would mean that I've like fully dealt with some of these issues. But the truth of the matter is, I feel more empowered knowing that like I can be a good friend, I can be a good son, I can be a good husband and a good boss and a good mentor to others. And I can do that simply by just seeing a person, listening to them, acknowledging what they're going through. And it's hard. I mean, this is probably the hardest thing I've ever had to learn, because in the past I've just been like, well, if I create something good for you, you'll love me, and you'll love me by hiring me or paying me or whatever it is, having me on your podcast. And I think those things are important. Like the sacrifices I've been willing to make for work have shown people what I'm willing to endure for what I care about for my craft. Yet I don't want that to define me. And that's the scariest thing, is like you get to a certain point in your career where those things kind of start to define you. And if you don't ever kind of grow beyond that, you get stuck in a really scary place. And I guess the antidote for me has been, besides self-reflection, therapy, things like that, has been to put the camera down and start telling stories in a different way, start using my voice, start using my words, writing, start directing films. It's just because it's so easy, if you're a painter and it's like you have the paintbrush and this represents you, and this is the camera for me was my way of filtering a complicated world. And all of a sudden I put the camera down and I'm like trembling. I'm this really well-traveled person who's seen stuff that many people should never see and or experience beauty beyond explanation. Yet there was a moment in my life where I'm like, why is it hard for me to just be here without the camera? Almost like this was my barrier of safety. And so putting that down, starting to articulate these experiences, starting to say what they meant to me, what I felt, and or just being there without the purpose of shooting has been really healing. And it's helped me come full circle back to your point of what you were saying earlier. Like the self-reflection can happen on a couch in your office, right?
So you use your camera as a shield to vulnerability.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know it at the time, but I definitely did.
And so scale of 1 to 10, just for kind of a reference point, 10 being, no, I know how to be vulnerable. I am skilled at vulnerability. And 1 being, the exact opposite. Where do you rate yourself now?
I think I'm about an 8 on the vulnerability scale. And I'm about I think in the beginning of my life, I'd say at the beginning of my career, I was probably about a 2 or a 3.
And when you are expressing, because vulnerability requires action. It starts with a state. It starts actually go even further upstream. It starts with a value proposition and then a commitment to that value. And then the courage to be about it. Like there's a downstream effect, right? And so there's courage involved with vulnerability, but you have to value it first to be it.
Yeah.
And then, so what do you do when you're in those moments where you could be vulnerable or you could choose words that distance yourself from the intimacy? And let me give you an example really quickly.
Yeah.
Is can you tell me a time when you were scared out of your mind? Well, those times when you see what I just did, as opposed to, okay, my heart was pounding. I felt like I was an absolute disaster. My eyes were swelling. I was about to cry. And okay, so I went from the pejorative to the intimate, and then more next level down with intimacy is and vulnerability is, can you express what you are feeling right now? And so that's like the most intimate, most vulnerable, because you leave yourself open for the vicious lion to either kind of take you like and pull you in to the den, or to shred you and leave you at the gate. So, or not the gate, but at the opening. So
yeah,
I say that, can you talk through, how do you do it? How do you practice vulnerability?
Yeah, I think that it started with conversations with my wife. I think that I would attribute so much of my willingness to be more raw, more real with her, and I had to work through a couple of very critical things in my life, which is that all the relationships I had with men in my life, I was projecting upon them the fact that I wanted their acceptance because I didn't grow up with a dad. So I know I'm kind of jumping away from.
No, wait. Did you just practice vulnerability right now?
I hope
was
so.
that. But did you make a conscious decision to take it into the specific emotional, intimate? Did you make a conscious decision right there, or was that really natural for you?
That was really natural for me, but it doesn't feel good to say. And
where did you feel it?
No, my reference for vulnerability always comes from how I feel in the moment, and if I know something feels uncomfortable to say, and if I'm slightly scared to say it, then I know that I'm speaking from a place of my truth or a place of my honesty. And I tend to be a highly emotional person. This is why I have a lot of the fire, a lot of the volcano inside. And I've learned to try to see that place as a place of power and not weakness. And I think that what this gets back to is that I like connecting with people. I used to be scared of that, but I like connecting with people, and I really like understanding people. And I genuinely want, even for selfish reasons, to connect with people so that I can better understand myself. And I think that what I've learned over the last couple of years is that in sharing the deeper and more intimate parts of oneself, I can then foster more deep and intimate relationships. And that sounds like schoolyard relationship stuff, but this is sadly what you get when you're talking to a 35-year-old workaholic, So this has been my journey to kind of understand that, and I feel like I've had to start at the beginning to understand it, and how certain relationships in my life manifest in the way that they did, how some of them and I had to go through each one. Go through each one that was a failure or was a success or was it, and look at what happened, why it happened the way it happened, and look at how I treat relationships now. But I think, to get back to your point, when I'm trying to engage with somebody emotionally, I think that the thing that holds me back is I never want to use emotion as a tool to try to, I like to use it as a tool to disarm people, because I think in some way people have a perception of successful people, highly successful people, I guess, as somebody who's not willing to be that emotional, not willing to be that straightforward, not willing to be that honest. And I think that never want that to come across like a competition, because I've met some people in my life who I'm like, they're really laying a lot on me here, and I want to connect with them, but I'm not sure if I'm feeling that. So it takes me a minute to still warm up. So I think that I progress in that field of emotional maturity and or connectivity, where I feel the comfort. Like I don't feel like I'm going to get pulled into the lion's den, ripped apart, and then I feel like it allows me to open up more.
Mm. I really appreciate the delicateness of the words and how you choose your words. To me, it's apparent that you understand from an embodied live experience of, what it means to be true and honest, and the courage required to be vulnerable. And so it is what we ask. You and I both work with the same folks, the best in the world at what they do. And obviously different skills and different crafts, you are capturing them, and I'm working from their inside out, and so it's not lost on me the work you've done. So you kind of threw in there that you've done therapy, and like, what does that mean?
Yeah, I think all kinds. From a physical perspective, psychological perspective, I think sometimes people lose sight of what therapy means. Like therapy is kind of, when broken down, we think of it as like listening or someone listening to us, whatever. But I think some therapy can also be you're listening to your own body, what it needs. You're giving it what it needs. And sometimes that doesn't always mean to stay in an engaged, flex state. Sometimes it means like giving yourself the opportunity to heal something. I've never been good about that, right? So trying to listen, self-therapy, and then also actually going to a therapist, and from a relationship standpoint, that's been really helpful. From a personal standpoint, that's been really helpful. From a psychedelic standpoint, that's been really helpful as well. And it's been a really eye-opening experience, and it comes with a lot of pulling off bandages, and kind of like sort of letting those wounds kind of fester for a minute. That's the hardest part, when you're like, whew, wow, I really have a consciousness of how much I hurt this person, how much I hurt myself, how much I didn't allow, I wasn't able to see something that was right in front of me the whole time. And I think nowadays it's like life is therapy, or therapy to others, meaning that I want to be a better listener, be a better student of it. And it's a beautiful thing, because I've been married for 15 years. So lucky to have found someone so young, but like our relationship would have never survived without therapy. And what's so odd is like, not odd, but what's so interesting is you hear people talking about how, the relationship only seems to get better. And I can truly acknowledge that, like, I love my wife now more than I ever did, because I literally didn't know how to love someone at that early stage. So, and also my career, like what I do for a living, the gift that I can maybe offer. I'm more confident about saying that it is even a gift, because in the past, all I attributed what I did to was work and purely like putting food on the table, as opposed to now it being more of a calling, of something more spiritual, of something more important.
Do you have a spiritual framework that you connect to?
Yeah, I do, for sure. It oscillates for sure, within the place that I'm in, or where I'm at, or who I'm with as well. I really like to be a student of that and kind of learn more. Like that's probably the one space that I'm always working to kind of understand and learn more. But it's ingrained in me, from a young age, growing up from a religious background and whatnot as well.
So does that mean, like, is there a specific religion? And I asked about spiritual framework, but did you just answer it in the way that like there's a religion or set of rules and practices that I identify with?
I've been religious since I was about 8 years old. I part of the Church of Jesus Christ. So I believe in Christ and Christianity. But I would say with that, I just don't want to relegate it to like, this is my religion, these are my rules. Because I feel like in my mind and in my experience, religion is such a bigger thing than a book and a building. To relegate it to that would be such a poor use of, I think, the practices. Okay. So it really does. It oscillates between kind of, I think, how and what, we all deem spirituality, and how I can in some capacity interpret that for each person,
So let me ask a spiritually related question.
Yeah.
So there's two parts. What happens once your body dies, and what is your purpose as a person right now on the planet?
Purpose would be to, I believe, find joy and to share joy. Man is that he might have joy. That is what I believe. But also at the same time, my goal is to become more like my Father in heaven, right? So a more perfected version of myself. And perfect does not mean without sin. Perfect does not mean perfect. Perfect actually means whole. It means complete. That's the translation. So I'm striving to become a more complete version of myself so that I can better serve other people. I think that's honestly what it all comes down to, is like service is at the root of any religion that I subscribe to, any religion that I really listen to, is service is where it's at. So in order to serve others, you have to first be able to serve yourself and feel complete enough to offer something. And so that's what I'm striving for. And in the midst of that, if it's not bringing you joy, why are you doing it? Right. Which is odd.
Joy
we started
or suffering. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's funny. And then what happens after we die? I believe that we absolutely get a chance to meet our Creator. We get a chance to see the divine plan. We get a chance to be with our loved ones. I feel like there is for sure a life after this. I feel like it doesn't, this might sound odd, but it doesn't really like make and change the way I feel like I want to live my life right now. Like it doesn't, and this is maybe this might be an odd thing, but I think so many people, sometimes they think, oh, well, yeah, you go to church, you do these things, you pay things like tithing because you want to secure your place, beyond this life. When really it's like, no, those things just bring me joy. Like they actually make me happy. Like I don't subscribe to a religion because I feel like it's meant to like necessarily just serve me. I subscribe to it because I know that it helps other people. And that when I step into church, the few moments that I get a chance to go, because I'm usually traveling or busy, I think about what I can do for somebody else. I think about somebody else that's in that building that's suffering or struggling. I mean, church should be not a museum for saints, but a hospital for sinners, right? So I think of who my experience as a human being on this earth and the privilege I've been given could potentially help somebody else with what they're going through and lift them up. Because that in the end of it, that's what's important.
I'm so glad I asked. Okay. You've done a lot. Yeah. You've done a lot of work on the inside. And let me kind of flip it and juxtapose to the church of social media.
Yeah.
We used to spend, let's call it a 50-minute prayer, once a day, prayer before meals. And I'm being a very kind of, glib view of the Christian faith. And then an hour, in on Sundays. Okay. We spend way more time now on social media. And your business, your business is dependent on it. So like, what is your relationship with social media like? And
I would say that luckily my business isn't dependent on it. It's greatly benefited by it. But the main pillar of income that we subscribe to is commercial work for clients like an Apple or a Toyota or whomever. It's a lot of what we shoot. And over the years, that's really sustained us, coming from the editorial world, working for magazines, and then transitioning to commercial photography. And nowadays it's commercial photography and directing and whatnot. That being said, I will absolutely say that the word gets spread, the good word of social media gets spread via that tool, that marketing platform. And I'm all in. I love it. I mean,
I see what you did there.
Yeah. And it's funny because I truly feel like it is the ultimate example of how when something is used for good, it can bring good. When something is used for bad, it can bring bad. And I'll be the first one to raise my hand and say I spend way too much time in that space daily. I can't stand it. Luckily, I also get outside a lot. But I think that what I've had to do in the last 5 years is I've had to kind of break apart everything in my career and in my life and think about, why am I doing what I'm doing? I got onto social media a couple of years after it started. I was always a little bit of a late adopter. I got into it because at first, when I was traveling, there were these stories that weren't being told, experiences that I was having, going to Russia, for example. That didn't end up in the magazine. So I wrote about it on a blog. I wrote about it in Blogspot. And then all of a sudden, that transition to having maybe something a little more immersive, like a Facebook, where it would go to and then all of a sudden Instagram came out. But from the beginning, the objective was I had people at home I cared about who cared about what I was experiencing, and I wanted to have a place that was permanent that I could share that. And that was why I started. It was sharing stories with my mom, my dad, people in my community. You know, prior to social media, I'd come home and do slideshows for them when I'd get back from a trip to Tahiti or wherever. I place so much emphasis on going out and doing, you know, film screenings and going out and doing slideshows because I enjoy connecting with people. So to me, whenever I've taught social media, you know, classes on a global scale or for Fortune 500s, I always just tell people the same thing. All this is a glorified communication platform. It's a glorified texting app. And if you like communicating with people, you will often find success in those platforms. If you don't, then it's going to be more challenging for you. And obviously you can control the tonality of where you want those conversations to go. And it's a tough world to manage. It affects me mentally, emotionally, physically. But I'd be lying if I didn't say that some of the greatest people I've ever met, the most real, honest, emotional relationships I've ever had have come from that platform. So I'm indebted to it. I'm truly indebted to it. The people I work with, people that work in my studio, people I travel with, you know, day in, day out, spend nights in tents and, you know, cooking over campfires and ski touring and the mountains. Like, these are people that I've met on these platforms. Yes, I still have friends, people that I grew up with, but I tend to navigate towards groups where we share like-mindedness. And so I think that I just wanted to set the stage in some way as to like how my relationship with it is now and where it's hopefully going in the future.
And for many people, it is a social comparison medium, right? And so it's the interpersonal business of comparison to others. Mm-hmm. And so as a creator, where do you or how do you navigate the comparison of what other people are doing and the potential fear of what they might think about your work? Because learning from you right now, I imagine if you're orientating your life towards truth and honesty, and you know, I'm conjuring my aunt right now, who's an artist, canvas artist, and she's like, Mike, listen, if I need money, when I was coming up, when I needed money, I would just paint a lighthouse. I don't know why. People buy lighthouses. And so that was like the full-on safe bet, but nothing true to her craft. Okay.
Yeah.
So we've got this medium comparison. How do you manage other people's opinions as a creative through this world of social technology that we're in right now?
Absolutely. This is a great question. No, I mean, you nailed it on the head. I think that to me, I want to flip that on its head just a little bit. And I want to say that you and I could go to the same vantage point in Yosemite, take the same picture. It's a beautiful photograph. There's nothing wrong with it. People have shot it millions of times. What might make your image or my image more successful, I guess you could say, in terms of success, meaning more interactions meaning more time spent by people, because time is the only currency that matters in social media. That's all it is. Likes, None of that matters. It's about how much time did somebody spend. This is why comments, and mostly negative comments, they propel things to the top. It's not some funky algorithm. It's time. People spend more time. They spend more time defending themselves than anything else. But back to my point here, you and I could go shoot the same photograph. What I might be willing to say about that photograph, emote a part of me personally, what I might be able to describe a part of that photograph. Maybe I don't describe what people can already see in the image. If someone like you or somebody else, you would never do this, but if you just said, the mountains are calling and I must go, you're gonna lose the opportunity to, and a very important principle, which is that this is the place you make your own quotes. This is the place where you say what's on your heart. This is the place where you tell people what the experience was like of creating this. You created it. And just because you created something that somebody else created, does that make it any less important? No, you stood there. The wind hit the back of your neck. Your hands froze. Your feet got cold. You ran out of food. Your headlamp turned off. You created something. So tell me what that was like. And this is what I've tried to practice. This is my mindfulness practice. Is like, I want to give people a sense of that. I want to tell people what that was like. And I try to do that through social media or films and whatever. But the point being is that I'm less concerned about creating something that somebody else has already done. I kind of want to almost do it so that I can then have the experience of sharing what that place means to me. I almost think that's a better practice, because at a certain point, everything's been photographed. Everything's been done. I'm not a denier of the fact that that the world has been photographed 10 times over, yet there are still so many untouched, beautiful places. And I seek after those places. I'm a student of those places. I yearn for them. But I really love just the idea of art as joyful experimentation and trying to get comfortable sharing what those experiences meant to me, no matter how, seemingly, I guess, seen repetitively they are. Has social media affected what I've shot in the past? At times, for sure. I've been susceptible to that, trying to, go after something that I think might just be like your aunt said, like the easy payday. That's like the best example ever. But at the same time, I still always want to, I feel like where I feel the most, like, I guess you could say worthless or meaningless, is when I do create something that I have nothing to share. That is the big marker for me that I did something wrong, or in my experience, I didn't create something that was truly worth the effort and the energy.
Mm. When you speak this way, you create space for me to want to share more, to want to put words to the experience behind the image. And so, what a gift! Like, you've created more space, and with that space, to add to the experience for others. And I love how you tied that back to joy. Really cool, man. Okay. So, how do you practice? Like, how do you sustain the practice of coming from this place? Because it's rare. So what do you do? What do you do?
I reflect, you could call it meditation, but sometimes meditation for me is like putting in music on a plane. That's like a song that really inspires me. You have that music that just conjures up emotion, and I try to oftentimes, like, for example, if I was going to share something on social media, usually the process is I go somewhere, I shoot it. I don't tend to share it immediately because my feelings haven't been processed yet. And I'll be driving somewhere or flying somewhere or sitting on my bed, and I'll have music in, and I'll just start, usually on my phone in a notes folder, I'll write down like what I felt. And usually that will be the beginnings of like a caption or something I want to share. And what I try to do is I try to find an image that correctly portrays that feeling. And this is kind of, and I'm only saying this because I've done this, the adverse, which is like find something, force yourself to say something about it, and then put it out into the world and hope for success. Because I guess the thing is that when I do it this way, I feel like it's a win no matter what. It doesn't matter if one person sees it or one person likes it, whatever. It's a win because I was vulnerable. because vulnerability is the key of everything. And that's all I care about now. Like if I was vulnerable and I wrote something that kind of felt a little flowery or a little personal or a little like that, that's a win because I gave something of myself to the world. And if you're not giving something of yourself to the world, you're holding it in. And that eventually creates a really, really firm wall that is hard to lower. And so I guess that's what I look for. And how do I sustain that in more of like a real time place? I think that it's critical that when I'm not working, when I don't have a camera or I'm not on a shoot, I'm filling up my time with the things that matter to me, the things I love, riding my bike. I'm going to yoga practice, which I've done for years. I'm building dirt jumps in my backyard. I'm going skiing, or I'm with my family, or I'm showing my kids something new. I'm giving time to my wife for her to learn something new or experiencing something new. That's a really critical thing in our relationship, is like making sure that both of us on more of like a monthly, weekly, yearly basis are learning something new. Because patternization is like it's the mind killer. It's the scariest thing to me. It's again, if I just continually went to the same countries over and over and over, even if they were cold and freezing, at a certain point that becomes mundane. So I think I'm constantly still fighting against the mundane.
Chris, like what a breath of fresh air, your honesty and the just what a breath of fresh air in this conversation. So
Yeah.
listen, I want to honor your time and say thank you. I hope we get to meet in person at some point.
I'd really appreciate that. I got to say, like, it's a different feeling talking to you. I've done a lot of podcasts and it's a really great experience. You're so masterful in your approach. And, I love going onto a podcast where I'm like almost a little bit nervous. I'm like, man, where's this one going to go? And I appreciate, just the tact and that you tend to balance tough subjects. It really makes it fun. So I appreciate that.
Hey, brother, that's awesome. You went there, and so I was following. Would you be okay if I played back my first pass of you? Would you be interested in that?
Please, yeah, for sure.
Okay, yeah. So wave me off if you're like, no, like that part is definitely wrong. But so my experience of after listening to you is that you've got an interesting balance between introversion and extroversion. And I would imagine in your younger years, you donned the extroverted way, but you were actually by default more introverted as a processor. You feel from the inside and choose to share those now. And that was a skill that you've developed. You're definitely open to experiences. You're highly conscientious. You are a lover of life, a bit neurotic. You come from an anxious place expressed through anger. There's an agreeableness to you that probably drives you nuts at some time because it's always pushed up against, fighting for the truth. But your nature to want to fit in and be in, you'll agree, you'll say yes, you'll compromise relationships, and you'll compromise promises that you've made to others for the adventure to go for it, which is probably the core spot in your relationship with your wife and your kids, is that you say yes to the other as opposed to yes to the family. That has caused you great drama. You're now snap back into, like, at some place in your life, you're like, no. That was the young version of me. The 2.0 version is mature and maturing in a way. I think that you're able to have this balance between your attention can go wide, you can drill into the details, but you don't get lost. You don't rabbit hole so deeply that you lose yourself in narrow attention. I think you've got this nice ability to go broad and narrow, broad and narrow. You've got an interpersonal style that people will really like being around you. You're more positive than negative. I think at an earlier part, you were probably more critical of yourself and your work. And that too has matured. I don't know if you've extinguished that criticalness. I didn't get to that yet with you, but
still in there somewhere.
Still in there, yeah. And so, I think that you also have a nice balance between going with the flow and schedule. You're probably err on the side of no schedule as a preference, but you've come to learn how to be scheduled. but that is a little bit of a hanging chad for me. But overall, I don't know. What do you think?
I love that, man. I really, these are the things, like the building blocks of what I really look for to like try to analyze myself in some way. Cause so much of what you're saying is like spot on truth. And so much of what you're saying, I'm like, man, I gotta sit with that. Cause it's still true, but it's also like one of the things where I'm like, that is very, very, that was very, very good analysis, and I love it.
Which part are you hanging on that you're like, I got to think
No,
about
like,
that
yeah,
part?
the agreeableness, because my wife would be like, yeah, Chris is nothing but unagreeable or whatever. But I really enjoyed the wide and the narrow and the wide, because I've trained myself to try to look at everything from that perspective, from the 30,000-foot view and the really, really acute view. And I noticed that
Mm-hmm.
being neurotic, caring about the details, if I get too hung up sometimes, it can ruin the entirety of an experience. And it's hard for me. It's hard for me to move past little things. Sometimes a word that kind of like annoys me, or something that somebody might, say. Sometimes it's hard for me to move past that. I've gotten better at that kind of empathizing. Empathy has become like a big theme in the last 2 years. And I think the more I've learned to empathize and realize that empathizing with somebody doesn't always mean agreeing with them, it's really helped me to be a better communicator, be a better listener, lead with less kind of emotion, anger. But yeah, it's
There you
all those
go.
things. They're
Okay,
great.
that's awesome. Yeah, cool,
Yeah.
man. All right, can you pass on one gem that that you to folks listening? They're like, listen, I wish that this has been so valuable to me. It could be a book, it could be a practice, it could be a philosophy, it could be a phrase, it could be a song, like something that you're like, this has just been meaningful. I want to pass it on.
Two things. Sorry. um, the book Essentialism by Greg McKeown was an incredible read, something that changed my life in my early 30s. And I'm kind of in my 30s right now, but when I was 30, it changed my life. I wish I would have read it earlier. It's been an incredible book. It's really taught me to dial in what it is I want and say yes to that more. And then I think that in terms of a phrase, it's simple. I want the world to tell better stories. And if there's one kind of phrase that helps to direct that, it's that don't describe to people what they can already see. Tell people what it felt like to be there. You are the author of this story, so give me your experience. And if you can make it more visceral, you can tell me about the emotions around it. That's going to really do the world a service to hopefully allow us to experience one another, to be put in each other's shoes. And I think for anybody that aspires to create art or just aspires to live in a creative way, I would really, really apply this practice.
I love them both. Chris, thank you for your time, your wisdom.
Yeah.
Thank your family
Thank
for
you.
allowing us to spend the time with you. So I appreciate it.
Yeah.